Have you ever wondered how incredibly thin the line is between unconditional love and a sugar-coated extortion labeled as family? I certainly found out. If you think blood is always sacred, brace yourself. My story has no ghosts, but the cruelty of those sharing my exact DNA will absolutely chill your spine. Do not look away because this invoice for $93,000 did not just buy a wedding, it bought an entire life. Hello, dear listeners of Haley Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to tune in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, meaning we no longer have the budget required to keep our operations running. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just a $1 donation so we can pay our hardworking staff for their living expenses and continue creating these stories to serve you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description or the comments section of this video. My name is Paisley Alvarez. I am 32 years old, currently working as an art director, and up until a very specific Tuesday, I actually believed that a mother's distress call was a sacred thing. It all started with a frantic text message that made my blood run completely cold. My mother Valerie claimed she had collapsed and was being rushed to an emergency room in Miami. The message was filled with terrifying urgency, begging me to come immediately because she did not know how much time she had left. Panic completely hijacked my brain. I abandoned a massive advertising campaign at my office, booked the first available flight out of my city, and spent agonizing hours suspended in the sky praying to a God I rarely spoke to that my mother would simply survive. I landed in Miami with my heart pounding violently against my ribs, rushing into a cab and practically begging the driver to speed to the address she had managed to send me. I was sweating, my clothes were a wrinkled mess, and my mind was racing with terrifying medical scenarios. I bolted into the sleek high-rise building and slammed my hand against the elevator button, expecting to step out into a sterile white corridor smelling of bleach and antiseptic. Instead, the heavy silver doors slid open to the deafening pulse of electronic dance music and a blinding sea of harsh white ring lights. I stepped out onto a sprawling, ultra-luxurious rooftop overlooking the gorgeous Miami skyline. There were no heart monitors. There were no doctors. There was only a carefully curated army of minor internet celebrities, towering champagne pyramids, and aggressive floral arrangements. It was an engagement party. More specifically, it was a content creation farm masquerading as a glamorous engagement party for my younger sister Chloe. Every single guest was holding a phone, desperately trying to capture the perfect angle to prove to their followers that they were part of the elite. Before I could even process the sheer shock of the environment, a pair of heavily manicured hands grabbed my arm with the force of a steel trap. It was Valerie. She was not on a hospital stretcher. She was draped in an aggressively expensive emerald green silk dress, her face baked in a flawless layer of heavy studio makeup. There was no trace of illness, only the terrifying frantic energy of a woman who was actively directing a live theater production. She dragged me directly into the center of the rooftop, right where a massive professional camera setup was actively live streaming to thousands of viewers on Instagram. I was still gasping for air, looking completely deranged and exhausted next to the heavily filtered aesthetic of the party. Valerie shoved a sparkly microphone directly into my face and plastered on a smile that did not reach her completely dead eyes. The most wonderful gift today is that older sister Paisley will sponsor the entire $93,000 for Chloe's dream wedding. Valerie shrieked into the microphone, projecting her voice so every single influencer in the venue could capture the audio. A chorus of exaggerated gasps and loud cheering erupted from the crowd of strangers. Phones were instantly shoved closer to my face, capturing my bewildered expression in crystal clear high definition. My brain completely flatlined. $93,000. The sheer audacity of the number echoed in my head. I stood there completely frozen, staring at the mother who had just faked a life-threatening medical emergency just to trap me in a public financial ambush. Seeing my absolute silence, Valerie leaned in tight against my shoulder. She expertly tilted her head to hide her mouth from the glaring lenses of the live stream. The fake radiant motherly warmth vanished instantly. "Pay for your sister's wedding, or you walk out of this family forever," Valerie hissed directly into my ear, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. She pulled back immediately, beaming at the cameras again, waiting for the immense social pressure to crush me. She had calculated this trap perfectly. She knew I hated causing public scenes. She knew the presence of thousands of live viewers would normally force me into a panicked, submissive nod just to escape the immediate humiliation. She fully expected me to fold. But something entirely new snapped awake inside of me. I looked at Valerie, then at Chloe, who was busy twirling her oversized diamond ring for a camera in the background. I reached over to the nearest silver tray and picked up a crystal glass filled to the brim with expensive vintage champagne. I did not yield to save face. I did not yell. I simply held the glass out over the pristine, custom-ordered multi-thousand-dollar white sheepskin rug that anchored the center of their perfect aesthetic setup. Maintaining unbroken eye contact with my mother, I slowly tipped the glass. The golden liquid cascaded down in a thick stream, violently ruining the pure white wool. The entire party went dead silent. I offered Valerie a slow, razor-sharp smirk, turned on my heel, and calmly walked back toward the elevator. The doors slid shut on her horrified, screaming face. The second the elevator began its descent, the silence in the metal box was shattered. My phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. It was the first of what would become a relentless, terrorizing barrage. 122 calls ringing back-to-back, tearing through the entire night. The flight back to my city was a complete blur of exhaustion and adrenaline, but the very second I stepped inside my apartment, the crushing weight of the silence finally hit me. I threw the deadbolt, fastened the heavy brass chain, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the front door. The vibration of my cell phone had not stopped since I left Florida. The screen was a chaotic, glowing waterfall of missed calls, tagged live stream videos, and venomous text messages from extended relatives I had not spoken to in over 5 years. I did not even bother to read a single word of their outrage. I simply pressed the power button until the device went entirely black, walked into the living room, severed my internet router from the wall socket, and effectively erased myself from the digital world. I needed absolute, impenetrable isolation. I desperately needed to keep my hands moving so my mind would not completely fracture under the immense psychological weight of what my own mother had just attempted to do. Looking for any kind of physical distraction, I walked into my spare bedroom and dragged out a heavy stack of cardboard boxes from my college years that I had intentionally ignored for almost a decade. The mindless labor of sorting through old textbooks, dried paintbrushes, and faded photographs felt somewhat grounding. Deep inside the bottom of the third box, buried beneath a pile of oversized winter sweaters, my fingers brushed against cold, hard plastic. I pulled the object into the light. It was a bulky, obsolete silver flip phone. The breath caught painfully in my throat, and a sudden wave of grief washed over me. It belonged to my late Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was my father's sister, and the only person in my entire bloodline who ever looked at me with genuine, uncalculated affection. She was loud, fiercely independent, and ultimately deliberately isolated and banished by Valerie for constantly refusing to submit to my mother's endless narcissistic demands. Beatrice died completely alone of aggressive breast cancer 7 years ago. I had secretly kept her phone as a hidden talisman, a tiny tangible piece of the only protective warmth I had ever known growing up. A strange, undeniable compulsion suddenly washed over me. I frantically dug through a junk drawer of tangled cords in my kitchen until I found an old universal charging cable that fit the archaic port. I plugged it directly into the wall outlet and sat on the kitchen floor. For 20 agonizing minutes, the small screen remained dead black. Then, with a sudden jarring mechanical beep, the tiny pixelated display flickered to life. The battery icon pulsed a weak green. I opened the main menu, my thumb instinctively navigating through the clunky, outdated interface toward the saved voicemails folder. There was only one audio file inside. The digital date stamp indicated it had been saved exactly 10 years ago. It was a time when my grandfather had just passed away, and shortly before Beatrice was completely exiled from our family circle. My hands were trembling violently as I pressed the speaker button. The audio quality was terrible, filled with the scratching sound of thick fabric, as if the phone had been hastily shoved into a coat pocket to record a private conversation in absolute secret. In the background, I could hear the faint clinking of silverware suggesting they were arguing in a public restaurant. Then the voices pierced through the heavy static. "You cannot legally do this, Valerie. That property is not yours to touch, and you know it." It was Beatrice. Her voice was sharp, furious, and highly defensive. Then came my mother's voice. It sounded slightly younger, but possessed the exact same chilling, manipulative cadence I had just escaped on that Miami rooftop. "Watch me, Beatrice. The old man was a senile fool to leave a prime commercial building in downtown Austin to a 20-year-old child. She does not even know the property exists. I am her mother. I am the executor of the estate. I will manage the asset until she turns 30. "Manage it," Beatrice snapped back, her voice echoing through the grainy recording. "You are forging her signature on commercial loan documents. You are aggressively leveraging her inheritance to fund your own pathetic obsession with country club status and luxury cars. When Paisley turns 30 and the trust legally transfers over to her, she is going to find a mountain of illegal debt instead of a secure future. Paisley will do whatever I tell her to do," Valerie spat, her voice dropping into a sinister, threatening register. "And if you ever breathe a single word of this financial arrangement to her, I will make sure you never see your precious niece again." The recording abruptly ended with a sharp digital click, leaving me sitting alone on the cold hardwood floor in total suffocating silence. My blood turned to absolute ice as the jagged, confusing pieces of the puzzle suddenly and violently locked together in my mind. The trust automatically transferred when I turned 30. I was now 32 years old. The commercial building located in downtown Austin. The forged corporate loan documents. Suddenly, the exact figure demanded on that glamorous rooftop flashed behind my eyes like a blinding neon sign. $93,000. It was such a highly specific, bizarrely exact amount for a wedding contribution. Nobody simply asks for exactly $93,000 for catering a DJ and floral arrangements. I slowly scrambled to my feet, my mind racing with terrifying crystal-clear logic. It was never about a wedding. Chloe's extravagant engagement party. The dramatic live stream, the public ambush designed to force my compliance. None of it was about celebrating my sister's love. It was a meticulously crafted, desperate theatrical illusion. The $93,000 was the exact to the penny amount Valerie needed to cover an impending default on the illegal commercial mortgage she had taken out in my name. The bank was undoubtedly preparing to sue the estate. The massive financial fraud was about to be officially exposed. And my mother was using my sister's fake fairy tale wedding as a psychological extortion tactic to make me blindly hand over the very money needed to save her from going to federal prison. By 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I was sitting at my desk at Aero Vanguard Solutions, staring blindly at my dual monitors. The sleek minimalist glass architecture of the tech firm usually brought me a sense of highly structured peace, but today, the air in the office felt incredibly thin and difficult to breathe. I was running on absolutely 0 hours of sleep. The horrifying revelation from Aunt Beatrice's hidden recording was still burning a hole through my mind. I was no longer a sister or a daughter. I was a marked financial target. Just before 10 o'clock, the internal phone on my desk buzzed loudly. It was Sarah from the main reception downstairs. Her voice sounded incredibly strained, hovering somewhere between extreme confusion and professional panic. She told me my family was in the main lobby making a massive, unignorable scene and absolutely refusing to leave until I came down to face them. I stepped out of the elevator into the massive sunlit atrium of the ground floor and stopped dead in my tracks. It was a perfectly orchestrated, grotesque circus. Valerie and Chloe were standing squarely in the center of the heavy morning foot traffic, flanked by two of my mother's most loyal gossiping cousins. Chloe was clutching a cluster of obnoxious, oversized mylar balloons, while one of the cousins awkwardly held a massive sheet cake covered in thick frosting. Valerie, however, was the main event. She was dressed in a conservative beige cashmere sweater, deliberately playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken matriarch. She was weeping loudly, clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest, making absolutely sure her tragic performance captured the attention of every single software engineer and executive walking past the security turnstiles. As I slowly approached the security desk, I heard exactly what she was saying to David, the head of building security, and a small group of my visibly uncomfortable colleagues. "We just do not know what else to do," Valerie sobbed, her voice trembling with expertly faked agony. "Paisley has been struggling with severe psychological episodes lately. She refuses to answer our calls. She owes the family a significant amount of money from a terrible manic spending spree, but we do not even care about the massive debt anymore. We just want her to get the psychiatric help she desperately needs. Please, we are completely terrified she might do something drastic to herself or others." The sheer psychological warfare of her lie was physically suffocating. She was actively weaponizing the heavy stigma of mental illness to destroy my hard-earned professional reputation right in front of my peers. She was painting herself as the ultimate victim while simultaneously laying the groundwork to explain away my sudden refusal to pay her absurd demands. It was an act of gaslighting elevated to an art form. My colleagues were staring at me with a sickening mixture of pity and alarm. Chloe spotted me first. She immediately dropped her fake sad expression, her face morphing into a tight mask of aggressive triumph. She sharply nudged my mother in the ribs. Valerie turned dramatically gasping and rushed toward me with her arms wide open. "Oh, Paisley, my sweet girl, we brought you an apology cake. We just want to bring you home and get you the residential treatment you need." Before the Miami trip, the overwhelming public pressure and the direct threat to my career would have made my chest tight with suffocating panic. I would have quietly ushered them into a private conference room to negotiate a surrender just to stop the sheer humiliation. But knowing what I now knew about the Austin commercial property staring directly at the woman who had forged my name to steal from my future, I felt absolutely nothing but a terrifying freezing calm. I stepped back, entirely avoiding her outstretched embrace. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of visible emotion. I turned my head slightly and made direct, unwavering eye contact with the head of security. "David," I said, my voice cutting through the noisy lobby like a blade of solid ice. "I have no idea why these individuals are making these bizarre and defamatory claims. They are not authorized to be on the premises of Aero Vanguard Solutions. Please escort them off the private property immediately. If they resist in any way, call the police and press charges for criminal trespassing." Valerie froze instantly, her arms still awkwardly suspended in the air. The fake glistening tears vanished in a millisecond, replaced by a flash of genuine venomous rage. The two cousins gasped loudly in unison. Chloe completely lost her manufactured composure. The sweet, concerned sister facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She aggressively threw the bunch of balloons onto the polished marble floor and lunged forward, pointing a heavily manicured finger directly at my face. "You cannot do this to us!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high glass walls, completely ignoring the large security guards stepping firmly between us. "You owe us that money, you arrogant, selfish witch. You are going to pay for my wedding, or I swear to God, I will burn your entire miserable life to the ground." I did not blink. I did not respond. I simply turned around and walked back to the elevators, listening to the deeply satisfying, chaotic sound of David and his team physically forcing my screaming sister and mother through the revolving glass doors. However, the silence I bought was only temporary. At exactly 9 o'clock that evening, while I was sitting alone in my dark apartment, an email alert pinged loudly on my laptop. The sender was Chloe. The subject line was completely blank. The message inside was brief, ruthlessly calculated, and completely stripped of any familial pretense. It was pure, unadulterated extortion. "You humiliated us today, but you are not walking away from this," the email read. "Mom has a heavily documented file of your supposed erratic behavior, your fake mental breakdowns, and your severe financial debts. If you do not wire the exact sum of $93,000 to the account below within 72 hours, we will forward this entire fabricated dossier directly to the board of directors at Arrow Vanguard Solutions, along with a legally drafted statement claiming you stole from your own family. Your entire career will be over before Friday. Tick-tock, big sister." They truly thought they had me trapped in a desperate corner. They thought I was just a frightened, obedient corporate employee terrified of losing her comfortable job. They had absolutely no idea that while they were busy playing petty high school blackmail games, I was already silently preparing a federal execution. The incredibly aggressive extortion email I received that night completely shattered any lingering pathetic illusions I still harbored about family loyalty. I was not dealing with a difficult mother and an entitled sister anymore. I was dealing with a highly organized, desperate criminal syndicate that just happened to share my genetics. If I was going to survive this, I needed someone who specialized in destroying financial parasites. The very next morning, I used a personal day to walk into the imposing mahogany-paneled office of Marcus. He was a notorious corporate litigator and a private financial investigator who looked at bank statements the exact same way a forensic pathologist examines a violent crime scene. I sat across from his massive desk, handed him the archaic flip phone containing the decade-old audio file, a printed copy of the threatening email, and every single piece of identifying information I possessed regarding my mother. I told him I had less than 72 hours before they attempted to detonate my corporate career, and I needed to know exactly what was buried underneath a specific commercial property in downtown Austin. Marcus did not offer me a sympathetic nod or a comforting cup of tea. He simply cracked his knuckles, opened his encrypted laptop, and immediately unleashed his entire team of forensic accountants on my family. 48 hours later, I was sitting in that exact same leather chair staring at a thick, heavily indexed binder of redacted bank records, loan agreements, and property deeds. The sheer dizzying scale of the financial spiderweb Valerie had spun was absolutely breathtaking in its calculated audacity. "Your grandfather placed the Austin Commercial Building in an irrevocable trust," Marcus stated, his voice a low, steady rumble of pure facts. "Valerie was designated as the trustee, yes, but only until your 30th birthday. However, 3 years ago, when the commercial real estate market experienced a massive surge, she realized the immense, untapped equity sitting idle in that property. She completely fabricated a durable power of attorney, expertly forged your signature on dozens of pages, and successfully secured a massive commercial mortgage against the building. She literally stole the roof right over your head without you ever knowing you owned the walls." I stared at the photocopied mortgage document lying on the desk. The forged signature was a terrifyingly accurate replica of my own handwriting. "Where exactly did the cash go?" I asked, though the sickening feeling twisting in my stomach already knew the grim answer. Marcus flipped to the next tab in the binder, revealing a massive color-coded spreadsheet of wire transfers. The stolen funds did not go into a secure retirement account or a legitimate business investment to grow the estate. It was entirely and systematically funneled into a complex series of shell corporate accounts, which then directly paid for Chloe's heavily manufactured internet reality. Every single luxury car lease, every massive designer handbag haul featured in her videos, and every first-class flight to exotic locations over the last 3 years was entirely funded by the stolen equity of my inheritance. Valerie had quite literally mortgaged my financial future to buy Chloe's fake social media empire. "But what about the $93,000? I pressed, pointing to the printed extortion email demanding that highly specific sum. "Why demand that exact number under the guise of a wedding?" Marcus let out a harsh, completely humorless laugh. He pulled out a separate stack of beautifully embossed invoices for luxury catering, high-end floral arrangements, and premium venue rentals. We dug into the supposed wedding vendors, Marcus explained, tapping the stack of elegant paper with his pen. The entire wedding is a cheap, hollow facade. The actual legitimate deposits paid for the venue and the dress total barely $20,000. These other massive, exorbitant invoices, they are completely fraudulent contracts Valerie drafted herself on a home computer. The remaining $73,000 is the exact amount she is currently in arrears on the fraudulent commercial mortgage. The bank is preparing to file a formal notice of default by next week. If that happens, the court will audit the trust, they will legally contact you as the primary owner, and her entire house of cards immediately collapses into a massive federal indictment. I leaned back heavily in the chair, the cold reality seeping directly into my bones. Marcus leaned forward, clasping his hands tightly together on the desk. "You turned 32 this year," he said, locking eyes with me. "Legally, that building became your sole uncontested property 2 years ago. By continuing to manage the fraudulent loan, transferring the illicit funds across state lines, and now using explicit extortion to secure the balloon payment under the guise of wedding expenses. Your mother and sister have officially graduated from petty family manipulation. This is no longer a civil dispute over a will. They are actively committing aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and federal money laundering." He smoothly slid a pre-drafted, heavily detailed police report across the polished wood. "I can submit this directly to the federal authorities right now," Marcus offered quietly. "They will be in handcuffs before dinner, and your position at your company will be fully protected by an immediate restraining order." I looked down at the crisp white paper. I thought about the deeply humiliating spectacle they orchestrated in my lobby. I thought about the thousands of strangers watching me on that live stream. I thought about the 72-hour threat violently hanging over my head, designed to break my spirit. Handing this file to the police behind closed doors felt far too quiet. It felt entirely too clean for the immense amount of dirt they had aggressively tried to bury me under. I slowly placed my hand on the police report and pushed it back across the desk. "No," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any hesitation. "If I simply have them arrested right now, they will aggressively spin the narrative. Valerie will cry to the extended relatives, claiming I coldly framed them to avoid helping my poor sister. They will play the innocent victims forever." Marcus raised a single eyebrow, a slow predatory smile beginning to creep onto his face as he realized exactly what I was doing. "So what exactly is your instruction?" I stood up smoothly, buttoning my suit blazer. "We quietly freeze everything," I instructed him. "Every single account, every line of credit. But we do not tell them a single thing. Let them firmly believe their pathetic extortion actually worked. I want them to climb all the way up to the absolute peak of their arrogant delusion. I want them to feel completely, utterly invincible. And then I am going to push them off the edge myself." Exactly 48 hours after receiving that venomous email, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. I did not call her with anger. I needed to perform the absolute best acting job of my entire life. When she finally answered, I let out a long, violently trembling sigh, carefully crafting the illusion of a woman who had been completely broken by the relentless pressure. "You win," I whispered into the receiver, making my voice crack perfectly. "I am terrified of losing my job, Valerie. Please do not send that file to the board. I will give you the $93,000. I could practically hear the immediate toxic surge of dopamine flooding her brain on the other end of the line. She let out a sharp, triumphant breath. However, before she could gloat, I quickly laid down my trap. "But there is one strict condition," I continued, sniffing pathetically. "If I am giving away my entire life savings, I want to be publicly forgiven. I will not wire the money blindly. I want to hand you the physical check in person in front of the entire family. I need everyone to see that I'm making amends and supporting my sister." The sheer narcissism of my mother made her completely blind to any potential danger. The idea of me deeply humiliating myself by publicly submitting to her authority in front of an audience of our relatives was absolutely irresistible. She instantly agreed, her voice dripping with sickly sweet manufactured maternal forgiveness. Within mere hours, Chloe and Valerie had booked the absolute most exclusive, ridiculously expensive bridal boutique in the entire city for an emergency event they literally dubbed a dress fitting and check signing ceremony. It was perfectly on brand for them. They formally invited every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had spent the last 3 days leaving me vicious, screaming voicemails. They wanted a massive audience to witness my utter financial and psychological defeat. They were so completely consumed by planning their glorious victory lap that they had absolutely no idea what was happening in the shadows. While they were busy ordering expensive catering and champagne for the boutique, I was sitting quietly in a secure conference room with my attorney, Marcus. "The emergency injunctions are officially approved by the judge," Marcus stated smoothly, sliding a stack of stamped court orders across the table. "Every single bank account, credit line, and investment portfolio bearing Valerie's name is completely frozen. She currently does not have access to a single dime. Furthermore, the civil lawsuit regarding the commercial property fraud is officially filed and actively moving through the federal docket." It was a completely flawless financial execution. If she tried to buy so much as a cup of coffee right now, her card would instantly decline. But she would not know that until she actually tried to use them, and I was betting heavily that her current arrogance would keep her from checking her balances before the big event. There was still one crucial piece left to place on the board. Chloe was marrying a man named Julian. Julian came from a highly respected, heavily scrutinized family of old-money real estate developers. They were the exact kind of wealthy conservative people who utterly despised public scandals and financial instability. Chloe had spent years carefully convincing them that our family was equally affluent and respectable. I carefully packed a thick, unmarked manila envelope. Inside, I placed the undeniable, heavily certified proof of my mother's massive impending bank default, the fraudulent mortgage documents, and the detailed records showing the stolen funds flowing directly into Chloe's personal accounts. I paid a private courier in physical cash to hand-deliver the package directly to the gated estate of Julian's parents, absolutely ensuring it required a direct signature from his father. On the night before the fitting, I sat alone in my perfectly quiet living room. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that had plagued me for days was completely gone, replaced by an eerie, freezing tranquility. The storm was fully primed and ready to break. My phone screen suddenly lit up the dark room. It was a direct text message from Chloe. "Would it not have been so much better if you just knew your place sooner?" She mocked the arrogance practically bleeding through the digital screen. "Do not be late tomorrow, and make sure you bring a nice pen." I stared at the glowing words for a long moment, feeling the absolute power of knowing exactly how her entire world was about to end. I did not type out a furious paragraph. I did not engage. I simply smiled gently in the dark and sent back a single yellow thumbs-up emoji. The atmosphere inside the ultra-exclusive bridal studio was so incredibly thick with manufactured joy and expensive perfume that it was almost hard to breathe. I walked through the towering glass doors right on time, stepping into a massive room lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and plush pink velvet sofas. At the very center of the room, standing proudly on a circular viewing pedestal, was Chloe. She was draped in a massive, obscenely heavy wedding gown, covered entirely in hand-sewn crystals that caught the blinding light of a dozen flashing camera phones. Surrounding the pedestal was the audience my mother had so carefully assembled. Aunts, uncles, and cousins holding crystal flutes of champagne, all of whom had spent the last several days blowing up my phone with hateful, venomous messages about my supposed selfishness. As soon as I walked in, a heavy, expectant hush fell over the room. The phones immediately pivoted away from Chloe and pointed directly at me. Valerie stepped out from the crowd, glowing with an arrogant, absolute certainty. She looked like a queen about to accept the unconditional surrender of a defeated enemy. She walked right up to me, stopping just inches away, and pressed a blank check and a heavy gold fountain pen into my hands. "We are so incredibly glad you finally came to your senses, Paisley," Valerie announced loudly, her voice echoing off the high ceiling, making absolutely sure every single recording device captured her magnanimous tone. "Go ahead, write out the $93,000. Show your family that you are finally ready to be a supportive sister." I looked down at the crisp piece of paper. I could feel the eager, judgmental stares of 20 relatives burning into the side of my face. I slowly uncapped the heavy gold pen. The silence in the boutique was absolutely deafening. Every single person was holding their breath, waiting for me to legally sign away my financial freedom. I placed the pen on the paper, but I did not write out any numbers. Using large, deliberate, and incredibly bold letters, I dragged the ink across the payee line. When I was finished, I capped the pen, took a half step back, and held the check high up in the air, slowly rotating it so every single camera lens in the room could capture exactly what I had written. It did not say $93,000. It read, "All assets frozen by federal court order." A collective wave of deep, uncomfortable confusion rippled through the room. Valerie squinted, leaning forward to read the words. Her smug smile violently collapsed. Her face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. "What is this?" Valerie hissed, her voice dropping the fake sweetness entirely. "What kind of sick joke is this?" "It is not a joke, Valerie," I replied, my voice projecting clearly across the dead silent room. I calmly turned my head and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward the heavy frosted glass door at the back of the studio. The door instantly clicked open. Marcus stepped into the brilliant studio lighting. Following closely behind his imposing frame were two uniformed officers from the Economic Crimes Division, their heavy tactical boots thudding loudly against the pristine hardwood floor. The collective gasp from the relatives sucked all the remaining oxygen out of the room. Marcus walked directly past the bewildered aunts and uncles, stopping right in front of my mother. He held out a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents. "Valerie Alvarez," Marcus stated, his baritone voice slicing through the tension like a physical blade. "You are being formally served with an emergency federal injunction as well as an immediate summons for grand larceny, identity fraud, and severe financial embezzlement." One of the officers stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on his utility belt. "Ma'am, we need you to step outside to discuss the fraudulent commercial mortgage secured under your daughter's forged signature." Total, absolute chaos erupted. Aunts were shrieking. Uncles were violently lowering their phones, suddenly desperate to not be associated with an active crime scene. But before Valerie could even formulate a single lie to defend herself, the front doors of the boutique violently burst open. It was Julian. But he was not looking like a happy groom. He was flushed red with absolute fury. Marching right behind him were his wealthy, incredibly imposing parents. Julian's father strode directly over to the glass coffee table in the center of the seating area and violently slammed down the familiar unmarked manila envelope I had dispatched the day before. The horrific financial documents spilled out across the table for everyone to see. "Did you honestly believe you could hide this from us?" Julian's father roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers above. "Did you think we would not run a full background check on our future in-laws? You are completely broke. You are actively facing federal prison for stealing from your own flesh and blood." Julian looked up at Chloe, who was standing frozen on the pedestal, completely paralyzed by the rapid destruction of her fake reality. "We are done," Julian said, his voice dripping with pure disgust. "The wedding is entirely canceled. I will not marry into a family of delusional, thieving criminals." He turned on his heel and marched right back out the door, his parents following closely behind, leaving the massive bombshell detonating in their wake. That was the exact moment the dam completely broke. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, unadulterated agony. She threw a massive temper tantrum right there on the pedestal, stomping her feet so violently that the delicate, expensive silk hem of the borrowed wedding dress caught under her heel and ripped upward with a loud, sickening tear. Thousands of tiny Swarovski crystals scattered across the hardwood floor like shattered glass. Valerie completely collapsed. Her legs gave out from underneath her and she dropped heavily to her knees. She crawled across the scattered crystals, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. She reached out with trembling hands and tightly grabbed the bottom of my coat. "Paisley, please," Valerie wailed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. "Please, I am your mother. You cannot let them do this. Drop the lawsuit. Please, I will do anything." I looked around the room. The exact same relatives who had relentlessly harassed me for days demanding I pay the ransom were now staring at Valerie and Chloe with absolute unfiltered revulsion. They were physically backing away from the two women, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the toxic fallout. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to shrink me to fit her narrative. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no guilt. I felt completely beautifully free. I reached down and gently but incredibly firmly peeled her desperate fingers off my coat one by one. "You were right, Mom," I said softly, but loud enough for her to hear the absolute finality in my tone. "I am walking out of this family." I turned my back on the wailing, the torn silk, and the shattered illusions. I walked straight out the front doors of the boutique, stepping directly into the bright afternoon sun and sliding into the waiting black town car, leaving them utterly abandoned in the suffocating ashes of the fire they had built themselves. Hello again, wonderful listeners. Thank you so much from the absolute bottom of my heart for staying with me through this incredibly intense journey today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned at the start, since YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, we rely entirely on the kindness of listeners like you to keep our team employed and to continue bringing you these high-quality stories. If you felt satisfied by today's dramatic conclusion, please consider helping us out with just a $1 donation. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your support ensures our amazing staff can feed their families and keep creating the content you love. Thank you so much again, and stay safe out there.